All right, you guys. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. So I'm going to be coming at you and talking to you more as a personal trainer than I am necessarily a wrestler for today. And we're going to talk about nutrition. And when to begin with kind of talking about nutrition, I want to first say a few things about how we gather information and how we make opinions on things, anything, especially nutrition, and understanding where information is coming from. So when I'm not your 100% best choice of somebody to go to when it comes to nutritional advice. But I'm also going to argue because I'm just a personal trainer. I did 6 months of study, and the portion of nutritional work I did was probably 1 week of a study that we did, as well as the chapter that was in our textbook that went over nutrition. And I've kind of over the years I've gone through that a couple times now, and used different resources, and the things that were in those chapters, they do, because it's a textbook, they do cite all their sources, and they have them at the very back there, and there were probably somewhere around 200 or 250, if I remember correctly, sites, studies that were cited for each piece of advice that they were giving. It's an astronomical amount of stuff that they're looking at. And when the the American Dietetics Association and any major nutritional body, the way that they come to the recommendations they make is that they're looking at thousands of studies, and they actually only update the RDAs, the recommended dietary intake. I forgot what RDA actually stands for, so sorry about that. They look at thousands of studies that have been conducted, especially over the last 100 years, but there are still hundreds to thousands of studies that are done every year. And so when a scientific study is done, the first thing that you're going to see is that initial study that makes this claim. And if you read the study, they're going to say how many people participated in the study, how long the study had been taken, how did they gather their data, how did they control the data that they got, right? Who financed the study? All these things matter. And so the reason why I bring that up is that when we look at recommendations for nutrition, we have to keep in mind, where is that information coming from? And I was reading a review of Nancy Clark's sports nutrition book that I've read, and she's a registered dietitian. She's a professional who does this for a living. I think it was her who said it. It may have been another nutrition book, but one of the things that I've seen as kind of a theme when it comes to nutrition is that real sound nutritional advice and recommendations and all that, they don't really rock the boat that much. We get little bits of finer understanding of things over time, but the discoveries that we make are not going to be groundbreaking, right? And so, when a study comes out, a new study comes out, the way that study starts being considered by a major governing body is to actually do the study again and see if they can recreate the results. So you can have a study that makes this really outrageous claim, and it has 5 people in the study. It was conducted for 2 weeks. They didn't actually control everything that the person ate. They didn't monitor them around the clock. So there was no real way of knowing whether or not the participants had actually stuck to what they were supposed to be doing. But they make this outrageous claim that really, really contradicts what the major findings of the American Dietetics Association have found, and the RDAs that are out there. And what happens? The news gets wind of it, and they blow it out of proportion, right? If you look at any time that you see a study that is reported on by the media, usually it's going to be the first study. It has not been peer reviewed. It has not been double blinded. It has not gone through the full scientific process to confirm the findings of the review or of the study, but they don't. They haven't done anything to actually validate that study and confirm it. But a lot of times when these studies do get tried again, they don't get the same results. And one of the reasons why I bring this up is that the leading pop diet that's going on right now, which I'm not going to name because I don't want to, start that war, has something around over the last 30 years, 15 total studies that have actually looked into it and come to the results, the conclusions that that the original claimants have made, right? And so the thing about that is that those 15 studies, a lot of them were conducted by one person and his institute that he founded that basically was there to help him sell books. He is not a scientist. He is a reporter. He was a nutritional reporter, and he wrote some books, and he made millions of dollars off those books. And ever since then, the fitness industry has looked at those and said, we can't really do that. And that's one of the reasons why, generally speaking, a personal trainer like me, we can give you basic advice on nutrition, but we can't write you a program. We can't, we're not supposed to go outside of what the recommendations we were given by the American Dietetics Association is. And the reason for that is a lot of times trainers, when they go to school, they probably are only part of a 6-month program. Some people get a bachelor's degree, some people have a master's degree in athletic training, and they go into other fields. But generally speaking, they don't really want us giving really, really in-depth nutritional advice because we come in with our biases, and we, as Neil deGrasse Tyson kind of says that, one of the most dangerous things out there is someone who knows enough to think that they're right, but not enough to know that they're wrong. And that's what we see a lot when it comes to nutrition. So I'm going to defer to the experts, and I'm going to suggest that you do too. I'm going to tell you right now that anything that I give you here is coming from a personal trainer who has done 6 years of research on his own that adds on to what I already understood from my program. And I'm trying to get that information from as credible of sources as I possibly can. And I have seen 2 nutritionists in recent history, and both of them I asked about certain diets that are out there, which you probably have already guessed what they are, and they were horrified that I even asked or even considered that that might be a good idea. So, I would say that the best advice that you're going to get out of this video is see a registered dietitian. Go to, I think it's eatright.org or eatright.gov or eatwell. I'll put it in the link. That is, or just Google the American Dietetics Association and look at the information there. They have a lot of really, really great articles there. One of them, 2 of them I'm going to cite here. No, I guess I want to pick out one. That's going to go over, that particular diet and what they have to say about it, and why they're not recommending it. So, to kind of get moving on this, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go through this really quick. And what this is, was again, this is my own research. And, if you talk to a doctor, most doctors that I've heard or talked to about vitamin supplementing, don't generally recommend it. Now, I live in Seattle, Washington. We don't have a lot of sun a lot of the time, but for 6 months there, we are kind of a dark place to be. We're not getting enough vitamin D, so we might take a vitamin D supplement. A lot of times with my clients, I recommend having a whole milk. When I drink milk, it's going to be a whole milk that has vitamin D added to it because the fat in that milk is what's going to carry that vitamin D into your body. So you're probably not going to, if you're drinking skim milk, you're probably not going to get a whole lot of vitamin D from that. So that's a good, important thing to know. Now this is a thing that I did that was going over what happens when you overdose on vitamins, because I was raised to believe that especially water-soluble vitamins you can't overdose on. That's not true. And actually, that's dangerously not true. So, your fat soluble vitamins, such as vitamin A, if you have too much of it, you can have nausea, vomiting, vertigo, blurred vision, bone thinning, right? Osteopenia, liver damage, headache, diarrhea, skin irritation, joint pain, birth defects. Okay, and that's really common. So if you're going through, and one of the things that you need to understand about this is that fat soluble vitamins are stored in your body fat. So if you're supplementing a fat soluble vitamin, A, D, E, and K, and you are going through a massive weight loss, the vitamin level within your system is going to spike because you're losing fat and you're releasing those vitamins back into your system. And so it becomes even more dangerous to be supplementing with a fat soluble vitamin, which so for vitamin D specifically, you can get calcium buildup, poor appetite, nausea, vomiting, weakness, frequent urination, kidney problems, calcification of the arteries. So there are risks, although vitamin D, since most of us tend to be a little bit under on that, especially if we live in the Northwest, it might still be a good one for you to take. But you know how you find out whether or not you should be taking it? You get your blood drawn and they do tests on it, right? So the next one I want to point out, because B vitamins are particularly funky for that. So B6, when you have too much of that, you get nerve damage, numbness, decreased motor coordination, muscle spasms, cramps, headaches, fatigue, depression, irritability, insomnia, restless legs, permanent nerve damage, loss of strength, and neuropathy. And most of this damage is permanent. So, but the other thing that can happen is that you become less able to actually uptake vitamin 12, B12, which is actually the one that people tend to be more deficient on. Now, the last one I'm going to cover here is going to be your vitamin C. Now, this can create iron overdoses that become more likely, or iron overdoses become more likely. Kidney stones, gastrointestinal irritation leading to diarrhea, vomiting, dehydration, extreme thirst, fatigue, low urine, low blood pressure, and mineral imbalances. So it is harder because of the way we process and get rid of water-soluble vitamins, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're 100% safe, and I probably would never actually personally supplement anything that has vitamin B6 in it, because it's going to do more harm than good. It's better to get your vitamins from food, and that's going to help you try to avoid most of those issues. So that's kind of my little spiel on micronutrients. Now we're going to go into our macronutrients a little bit. And so we have 3 different basic types of macronutrients, and I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on this because really I think that there is a lot of understanding what's going on with them. So the first one that we're going to be talking about is going to be your protein. Now, having an understanding of how energy is utilized within your body, and understanding those processes, which we are trained as personal trainers, gives us a completely different perspective when we're talking about macronutrients and calorie intake, right? And so the thing about protein, like we hear this a lot, especially in bodybuilding, that you need lots and lots of protein in order to build muscle, and that vegans and whatnot do not get enough protein. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to digress here for a second. I might get onto a sidetrack. There are studies out there that say that veganism leads to longer lifespans, better health outcomes, so on and so forth. But there was a follow-up study that did to this, and this is why you always confirm your studies with other studies that looked into, well, what are the other factors that might be contributing to this? So vegetarians and vegans are a lot less likely to be heavy drinkers. They're a lot less likely to smoke. They're more likely to be shopping at their local food co-op type place. And so they're probably actually a lot more health conscious all around than somebody who's just eating whatever. So yes, being vegan does can actually increase your lifespan and lower your risks for a lot of diseases. But the flip side of that is, and this is what that study has found, is that even if you are eating animal products, including meat, you are not necessarily more prone to obesity, heart disease, other problems. It's just that since that's kind of the default for people, there's a lot more people that don't watch their diet that are bringing down those numbers. So if you are eating healthy, you are eating balanced, and you are eating clean, whether or not you're vegetarian or vegan actually shouldn't make that much of a difference. So one thing that we need to understand about protein is that when we have too much protein in our system, it doesn't just stay floating around in our bloodstream. And generally, if you get enough protein in your body within a 24-hour period, whether you do it immediately after a workout or not, or immediately before, or whatever, there aren't really a whole lot of studies that actually confirm that idea that you should immediately take whey protein after a workout. But then there's a lot more evidence that says that you just need to get enough protein throughout the day. Now, the idea that vegetarians and vegans don't get enough protein are not true. That can be an issue, right? It can be more difficult if you're vegetarian or vegan to get enough protein, but that does not mean it's impossible. And a lot of people, including my coach and his coaches, are vegan, and these guys have really amazing energy. They have really amazing bodies. They're amazingly healthy people. So let's not say, you're vegan, you're not getting enough protein. No, if you do veganism right, you can absolutely get enough protein. So I want to go ahead and dispel that myth. Now, if you have too much protein in your system, there's two results that are going to happen from that. One is that the protein is going to knees bothering me, is going to float around, and it's going to eventually end up in your kidneys. And the particulates of that protein are not going to be able to be filtered through your kidneys, and it's going to cause some kidney issues. So we want to be really careful with that, that we're not taking in so much protein that it's leading us to have those kidney problems. The other thing that can happen is that generally speaking, if you're in a low carbohydrate environment or you're not getting enough carbohydrate in your system, what's going to happen if you have enough protein is that your protein is going to go through a process called glucogenesis, where basically your protein is going to be converted into a carbohydrate so that your body can use it. The excess protein, parts of the protein that don't get used, again, go to the kidney, and you can start seeing issues like more occurrences of cancer or other things if you're having too much protein within your system. One of the more common issues that happen with high protein diets are gout, calcium deficiencies, kidney disease, sometimes constipation, certain types of cancer. So it's really kind of important that we don't ever go too excessive. And when we talk about the RDAs, the recommended ranges for things, the reason why they come to certain conclusions is because they're looking at health outcomes, right? And so it's not just about whether or not you're gaining muscle or you're losing fat or what's happening that you're trying to get to, but it's also what is going to give you the healthiest, longest lifespan. And so they take all this into account. So yes, certain diets may make you lose weight super fast, but do they necessarily promote good health for a long term? And the answer is no. So generally speaking, good recommendations per kilogram of body weight for if you are bodybuilding, you should have 1.2. So multiply your kilogram version of your body weight by 1.2 to 1.7. That will give you how much you should need. For active individuals, it's 1 to 1.7. For endurance athletes, it's 1.2 to 1.4. And generally speaking, it's a good rule of thumb that the body can only metabolize 20 to 25 grams of protein per sitting. Now, that recommendation actually has always kind of irked me a little bit, and here's why. Is that if you are, maybe 4 foot tall, a 4 foot tall female, and you weigh maybe 110 pounds, 20 to 25 grams of protein is going to be a lot for you compared to somebody who's 6'6" and 220 pounds. That may not be sufficient. So keep in mind your size and also the amount of muscle mass and then versus the amount of fat that you have on your body, because that's going to influence that. So we have, when we're talking about fats, we have 3 different types of fats, and technically speaking, our trans fats should be illegal now. And so what a trans fat is it's not necessarily a particularly naturally occurring fat. It's one that where we wanted to take a unsaturated fat and we wanted to thicken it up. And that does is it makes it so bacteria cannot break down whatever that trans fat has been introduced to. But it causes inflammation within your body, particularly in your liver, that causes you to start to release bad cholesterol into your system and increases your risk for heart disease. Now, I don't, anytime I see something on the label that says hydrogenated in any way, which is what your trans fats are, it's a partial hydrogenation. The fatty chains do not have, they're halfway full with hydrogen. Fully saturated fats are completely saturated with hydrogen. So when the FDA started to ban the use of trans fats in foods, a lot of manufacturers went from a partially hydrogenated fat to a fully hydrogenated fat, and you'll see that now that they contain fully hydrogenated oils, and that basically becomes a saturated fat, and saturated fats are correlated with heart disease. They are technically not healthy for you. There are some fringe studies that suggest otherwise, but we've actually had a lot of studies that look at them so that actually contradict those studies as well. So we have to really keep that in mind when we're deciding how much fats what we're going to have. And then an unsaturated fat is going to be ones that are going to be liquid at room temperature. So one of the things that I kind of think about with this is that you have to, and this is just my theory, and it can be completely bullshit, but when you are looking at a fat, your body's internal temperature is apparently now they're saying it's a little bit below 98.6 degrees. If the fat is going to be thick or solid at that temperature, it's probably going to cause problems within your body. Whereas if it's already starting in a liquid state, it's going to pass through your body more easily. Now the thing about fats is that when you eat fats, 1 gram of fat is going to have a little bit over twice the amount of calories that 1 gram of protein or carbohydrate are going to be. So it's easier to eat too much of fats if you are having them mixed within your diet. But a lot of people that have called for people doing and have tried to support the idea of doing a low carbohydrate diet and a high fat diet has said, well, the fat-free diets didn't work. Well, we'll get into that a little bit more here in a second, but basically when they started taking fats out of food, the food became less flavorful, so they started packing it up with salt and sugar and started making all this processed food that doesn't satiate you, so you're going to stay hungry, it spikes your blood sugar, and you're more likely to overeat and go into a hypocaloric state. And never did the FDA actually say you need to be on as a low-fat diet, specifically the low-fat diets that the way that people tended to interpret that. And generally speaking, the food industry tends to follow nutritional trends, right? So whatever is the hype is of the day, the food industry is going to follow that, and you can bet that they're going to try to find the most addictive, the most profitable way of capitalizing on that, right? And so, I can mention here for your unsaturated fats, we have poly and unsaturated monounsaturated fats, and these oftentimes are found in like olive oil and fish oil. That being said, a lot of times people think that they're eating healthy and they're going to dump a gallon of olive oil onto a salad and think that it's healthy. It's not, because you're adding so many calories to that salad by just adding that olive oil. So yes, there are health benefits to olive oil, avocado oil, even peanut oil. I don't personally trust canola, I don't use it. But yeah, you can be looking at all these unsaturated fats, and grapeseed oil I think is another one, and I don't really want to recommend oils because I'm not as sharp on that as I want to be. So to go ahead and do that. But there's 9 calories per gram of fat. And generally speaking, you should have about 10 to 30% of your daily caloric intake should be fats. And one thing that's kind of important to note is that it takes 3% of the calories from fat in order to metabolize fat for storage on the body, whereas it takes 23% of the calories that you eat from carbohydrate to have the same effect. So generally speaking, if your body doesn't need calories in the moment, it's going to store them. And that's part of the area where people get in trouble when it comes to carbohydrates. So we're now on to that now. So you have simple sugars and you have disaccharides, right? And so your simple sugars are going to be glucose, fructose, galactose, and then your disaccharides are going to be sucrose, lactose, and maltose. And so the more complicated your sugars are, the slower it's going to metabolize in your system. So generally speaking, your body likes to have consistent blood sugar all the time. And when you're taught first aid CPR, one of the things that they teach you in the first aid portion of that is that if somebody's having a diabetic emergency, you always respond by giving them sugar, you don't give them insulin. And the reason for that is if they go hypoglycemic and they're too low on their blood sugar, they could die. Whereas the problem with the hyperglycemia, too much blood sugar, is that it actually has long-term negative effects on the body, and it could like give them a headache for now. It can cause them to be unstable. There are consequences for them being hyperglycemic, but if you're not sure if somebody's hyperglycemic or hypoglycemic, it's better to raise the blood sugar than to lower it. And so basically why I bring that up is that if your body has mechanisms in place, your pancreas will release insulin into the system to keep your blood sugar at a certain level. If your blood sugar goes too low, your liver is going to release blood sugar or release sugar into your blood to bring your blood sugar up. So you've got these internal regulatory methods of bringing your blood sugar up to where it needs to be. And so if you are going out and you're drinking a soda and you've been sitting at a computer all day, or even better yet, let's say a sports drink, because a lot of people think sports drinks are healthy. If you're sitting around doing nothing, you're taking in all that very, very simple sugar, and it's going to spike your blood sugar, and your body's going to release insulin, but since it cannot gauge how fast the sugar is getting introduced, it's probably going to introduce a little bit too much insulin, so you're going to go into hypoglycemia. And so how are you going to respond to that hypoglycemia? Well, you're either going to release it from your liver, or your body, because it doesn't want to get rid of its stores, is going to cue you to eat more. And so you're going to eat more. Maybe you're going to eat crackers. Well, that's another simple sugar. And so you're going to ride that roller coaster all throughout the day, which is one of the reasons why people tend to recommend whole wheat, brown rice, legumes such as beans and whatnot, But this kind of brings me on to the next point when we're talking about blood sugar spiking. So you have the glycemic index of food, and the GI. And the thing that you have to understand about glycemic index is that it is based on you just eating that food by itself. And that is going to make some pretty big differences.